Welcome to Plain Civics. I'm Joe Ulery.
And I'm Bobbi Fisher.
And today is episode 1. We're setting aside politics. We're peeling all that back, pushing it to the side. And what we want to do is penetrate the walls to better understand how our government works, how civics works, and how important it is for us to have that knowledge. We're better off as a people when we have that knowledge. Since this is the first episode, let's just give you a real quick history of how we arrived at this table, which, by the way, is at the Westfield Public Library in Hamilton County. My name is Joe Ulery. I've been in broadcasting since 1988. I started part-time at the radio station in Logansport where I grew up, and it was so interesting to me. I've stayed with it. Now I'm almost 52 years old and still sitting behind a microphone, but with a much different purpose. Today, I'm not playing songs, records. I'm doing news, and I'm helping educate, and that's what's brought me to the table today with my 8th grade social studies teacher from Lincoln Middle School in Logansport, Indiana. In fact, I think it was your first year teaching that I caught you as a teacher. So Bobbi Fisher, tell us about you.
You are correct. You were my first 8th grade class at Lincoln Middle School. I taught in the public schools in Indiana for 29 years. As well as 3 years in the state prison system teaching adult education, where I taught all of the subjects. In Logansport and other places, I taught mostly social studies with a little language arts mixed in the early years. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in social studies education and a minor in English. I later added a master's in public history with a certificate in historical documentary editing. When I went back for my second master's, I actually won an award in 2015 for the best graduate history paper.
Nice.
Which I'm pretty proud of. I taught mostly U.S. history, some world history and world geography. During that time, especially the last several years of teaching, I attended several summer institutes for teachers that focused on civics and the U.S. Constitution, and one on Abraham Lincoln, who's my favorite president. Those summer institutes, the ones on civics and Constitution, were taught by some of our leading constitutional experts, professors at various universities. Besides teaching young minds about American history and civics, my favorite part of teaching the last 20 years of my career was the annual trip with 8th graders to our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and sometimes we went to Gettysburg and Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, and it was my favorite part to see kids outside of the school, having fun and learning at the same time.
So you mentioned Abe Lincoln is your favorite president.
He is.
And you and I met at a school named for the rail splitters for Abraham Lincoln.
That's correct.
That's pretty cool. All right, so I've got 5 questions I'm going to throw at you in a lightning round here so we can get to know a little bit more about you. So don't think about these answers, just whatever comes to your...
Okay.
All right, so here we go. The Fast 5. Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
Dog or cat?
Cat.
Speed or style?
Speed.
Fleetwood Mac or Whitney Houston?
Oh.
Did I stump you on that one?
I like them both.
Okay.
Well.
All right. All right. That's you can. Okay. We're gonna. Judges are gonna allow that.
I can't choose on that.
You were
one.
hoping I'd say like Fleetwood Mac or Taylor Swift.
Yeah, that would be Fleetwood Mac.
Okay. And summer or winter?
Oh, summer.
By far. So there's a quick lightning round to get to know Bobbi. First of all, it's so weird for me to call you Bobbi because you were always Mrs. Fisher, but I'm going to try to get there with some therapy.
But you're not little now.
I know. I'm 51, almost 2, but it's still hard as a matter of respect. So let's talk about the importance of civics, and it's for all of us here in America.
That's right. Our unique system of government in the United States relies on civic strength to govern. Think about it. It is we the people. In order to govern ourselves at all levels, all citizens must have the adequate understanding of laws, government, social issues, skills to be able to discuss and work together with people that they may have different views and beliefs with. They need to have a commitment to preserving and improving our society, as well as the rights and interests of all Americans.
All Americans.
All Americans. Unless you're dead right now and you're not paying attention to the news, we know that now in particular, this is very important. I see us getting off of that track.
We spoke to a couple ladies informally here before we started this podcast, and they were curious what we're doing today. And we said we're doing a podcast called Plain Civics, and they were so refreshed, and I think a lot of people are refreshed. Civics is probably not something that you paid a lot of attention to when you were in school, but now that we're out living with our families and on the streets and we have to work within the system, I think it's good to go back and get a education on civics at that 8th grade level.
As a longtime teacher, I taught mostly 8th grade, so we did have to cover civics. It's hard to engage children at that age. It's hard for them to see a relevance to their lives at that time. So you have some that pay attention, but some of them, they can't see why it matters.
Two things. One thing I noticed in our prep notes that you wrote down is you used algebra for an example. So let's talk about how you discussed algebra with kids.
I used to tell them algebra is important to some of you.
Some.
Chemistry will be. Maybe physical education. You all have to take most or all of those subjects, but some of you are never going to use algebra. I mean, I can't think of any times that I've used algebra.
Just FYI, I don't even know if I passed pre-algebra, so I don't know if you have access to those files, but if you do, burn them.
Well, I didn't teach that. So. But all of us and all of them are citizens. Mm-hmm. And so to teach children or even adults, if for those adults that are going to listen, it's important because you're all citizens. And we all should have the knowledge and the skill set that we need to be able to help continue our nation to exist, for one thing, and to be able to elect people to be our leaders. All of you are citizens, but you probably aren't all using algebra or chemistry. If you are, that's great. I'm not saying those are not important.
You're much smarter than I am if you're using algebra. Let me just say that.
Those are important, but again, not to everybody.
Right.
But everybody's a citizen. So you need to have the knowledge and the skills to preserve and continue this great experiment in our democratic republic.
And it is called the Great Experiment, right?
It is.
And we'll have it as long as we can keep it, I think someone
Ben
famously
Franklin said, a republic, if you can keep it, to a lady that asked, did they create a monarchy or a republic?
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned, this is fascinating to me, you mentioned that you've worked with students who are traditional students in the terms of age, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, maybe other grades, but you also had the opportunity to work inside the Indiana prison system.
Right.
And I'm curious, as a teacher, what's the takeaway?
This is sad, but if they knew they were only going to be in prison for a short time, I think they were a lot more interested. But I would say probably a little more interest in prison. And a lot of the students that I had there were still in their 20s. Many other people, a lot of them did not have much background in civics.
It has to be rewarding, though. Isn't that the whole reason most people become teachers? It's rewarding to share knowledge, and then when somebody connects and picks up what you put down, that's got to be rewarding.
Exactly. I see former students that...
like me?
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding.
Like you, that are in positions today, some in government.
Some of the kids that you had are actually working as part of the government today.
As part of it, I also, for example, like when things have happened in the nation, either in government or whatever, I've had former students contact me on Facebook and say, I'm so glad that you taught us about that because I understand it more, and I explained it to my parents.
Wow.
So
that's got to be rewarding as well.
It is.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room. I mean, I feel like this next paragraph of where we're headed is something we need to talk about, but it's not always popular to talk about. But I feel like now more than ever, there is a divisiveness in our nation that maybe I just don't remember it growing up because I was naive, or am I wrong? Has it gotten worse?
The polarization right now it's worse than I've ever seen it in my 67 years. I will say, knowing history, American history, it's not the first time it's been this way. Fortunately, we've come out of it before and become stronger. But we do have extreme polarization when we look at politics and government right now, to the point where some people have lost faith in our government because of all the 24/7 news and and social media.
Misinformation.
People have become very susceptible to believing false information.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they don't know how to sort that out and see what's real and what's not. But hopefully we can help them with that as we go through some of our topics.
Let me just throw in here, as you were going through your credentials at the beginning of this episode, I was over here in my mind checking off great big check marks and smiley faces, because you bring to this table a set of credentials that are far different than what I bring to this table. But together with your credentials and my broadcasting history, I feel like we're in a really good spot, and I feel so good about what we're doing. And I feel like when we talk about the elephant in the room, that maybe opens or cracks the conversation a little bit for us to have a kind conversation about things.
Exactly. This is intended to be educational, not at all partisan in any way, because that's my job, is to educate. And I just see a lot of cracks in our society today as far as civic knowledge. I want to seal those cracks up.
So let's talk about what research tells us when it comes to students who receive a high-quality education.
Getting a high-quality civic education makes students, whether they're young or even adults, if they did not get that information earlier on, more likely to vote. And we certainly need that,
yes.
as our voting percentage was less than 60%.
It was awful.
In 2024 nationwide. And Indiana was even worse.
And just real quick, we've talked about this, but compared to other countries, that's sad.
It's terrible. So people are more likely to vote if they have civic knowledge. They're more likely to complete college or develop employable skills. So we know not everybody's going to go to college, but
right.
We're talking things like just being able to get along with people, being able to entertain differing views.
Conflict resolution.
Exactly. People that have quality civic education are 4 times more likely to volunteer and to work on community issues. And they're more confident in their public speaking ability, their communication skills, and being able to feel like they can communicate with elected representatives.
If that's not a reason to get involved in civics right now, to be part of the conversation, become part of the conversation, that's how we fix things that are broken.
And those statistics talked a lot about younger people, but what we're going to try to do here on this podcast, we're hoping it'll be valuable to adults of any age who maybe need a refresher, or they slept through their high school government class, or were never offered much in the way of civics education, or just they have some knowledge, but there are parts of the way our government works that they don't understand and want to understand it better.
That's true even for me. My goodness, there's so many layers to our government.
Exactly.
When you get into judicial and legislative and all the different layers,
well, and you have
it's a lot to learn.
State, local. I mean, it's all different.
Absolutely. One thing I want you to really, really be clear on, our mission statement is to educate.
Exactly.
Nothing more, nothing less.
And we're not trying to make you be any political party or anything like that. We just want this to be relevant and educational, and we want to help people understand how our system works and how you can be a better citizen.
I don't think that's a foreign thought either, because it looks like you've got some stats from 2019 that talk about the public attitude toward learning about civics.
Right. Phi Delta Kappa, which is an educational fraternity sorority, in 2019 they did a survey of public attitudes. So these weren't just from educators, but from adults in general. Say 97% of Americans say civics should be taught in our schools, and 80% say values like honesty, civility, respect for authority, acceptance of people with different backgrounds, and patriotism should be taught as well. If you're teaching about civics and you use a lot of the stories and backgrounds as to how our nation came about, many of those things be taught right along with that. So it's not even like you have to create a new course.
Right.
It's just part of that.
I want to meet the 3% of people who feel that it shouldn't be taught in school. I'd like to offer them.
They're negative Nellies that think that all government is bad. That reminds me of something else I used to tell students, because they'd say, oh, I'm not going to vote because all politicians are crooks or put in whatever negative word you want there. And my thing is, especially in this day and age, and you think about our 24/7 news cycle, all of the entertainment stories and social media, we hear only about, or mostly only about, those politicians that may be corrupt or
the bad eggs.
Yeah. We don't hear about a large percentage of people that get elected who really want to do what's best.
Who do exactly what they swore an oath to do.
Or sometimes even more.
Yeah.
And you don't hear about them because that's not what gets...
It's not flashy.
No.
And growing up in the news business, I have to say, even for someone who is in the industry of news delivery, I have had to tell myself, quit watching so much cable news. Just because the segment ends doesn't mean all of a sudden the issue's fixed. These are things that require great deliberation and can't simply be fixed. As democracy, we've learned, is sort of a living thing, isn't it? It lives and breathes.
It is. The Constitution is considered a living document because it can be amended. The framers realized that times would change, and what they wrote in the original document, parts of it might need to be tweaked a little bit along the way as society changes and the needs of our nation was growing. So they already realized that things would be different, and maybe some of what they originally wrote might not work as well later on. So they made it so that it could be tweaked a little along the way.
I like that. And I think everyone should be open to being tweaked. You know, we should never feel like we're the final product and as good as we're going to get. And I look up and admire a person for two things. One, when somebody can admit that they may have been wrong about something and want to reevaluate it and want more facts.
Exactly.
I like that. And I like to think as a people, we also learn and evolve over time.
Exactly. Which kind of makes me think of another point. People, especially in politics, are upset, that, well, 5 years ago you said that you believed blah, blah, blah. So what if they change their mind?
Yeah,
Maybe
we're allowed to.
We're allowed to, because apparently they learned some new information that made them realize that their original thinking might not have been correct.
Different things that have happened over the years in history we can look back and point to say, oh, well, but they were on the wrong page then, but now we know the whole story now and we know the context now. So, yeah, I think it's not always a bad thing when somebody comes right out and says, look, my opinion's still evolving on this. I admire that.
Right. It's not flip-flopping if you're truly... You've learned more and you realize that maybe you were wrong.
Maybe. And if you're listening to your constituents, that feedback you're getting may also change. So many politicians at the state level used to do these sessions. They basically had what came on a Saturday. For example, where I grew up in Logansport, they had to go to Amber's Restaurant, which was this institution of a place on the west side. And Tom Weatherwax, our state senator, and maybe Rich McLean or whoever was in office would meet face-to-face, tell folks what they're doing, and take questions on anything. And that's the feedback, believe it or not, folks, that these people take back to the State House when they go, that communication.
I know every time the legislature's meeting, and I get these from federal officials too sometimes, but not as often, they send out surveys, and now you can just get online and go, you can fill the survey out and tell them, yes, I'm interested in that, or no, that's not really important to me.
Just don't throw it into the recycling bin when you get the questionnaire, even if it's from somebody who's in office whose politics you may not agree with. They're asking because they legitimately want to know how you feel.
Exactly. Remember, it's we the people, so they can't even begin to look at legislation and try to do what their constituents want if they don't know what they want.
They shouldn't have to guess.
Then people are complaining, well, they didn't pass this law. Well, and you may not always get what you want, but you should let them know what you want.
You have to see through an issue. You can't just one time say, I don't like this, and then that's your total involvement on steering that issue to fruition. You have to stay involved, and that's an exhaustive experience that could take years. It's not overnight.
Sometimes you have to keep writing to them or calling and leaving messages.
Yeah, and I've really honestly, over my career, never met a politician that represented Indiana or me in my district that wasn't thankful, whether the person agreed with them or disagreed. They were always thankful to get that response. So maybe that's one takeaway today of today's podcast is be engaged, be involved, be heard. And it's better to do that through a positive outlet directly to your representative than it is when you're having coffee at McDonald's.
Right, because they're not going to hear that.
No.
It's not going to go through osmosis or anything. So we thought we would end each podcast with a question that's taken from the actual U.S. citizenship naturalization test. Everybody that's already born here should know these things.
We should, but I don't think we do.
No.
Should and shall are two different things.
So just remember, maybe 8th graders or high school kids should have to answer these too.
Maybe, yes.
Yeah.
Put a pen in that one.
So here's question 1. What is the supreme law of the land?
The supreme law of the land. All right, so that seems like that's an easy question, but we'll see. Next episode, what are we talking about?
A brief history of civics education in the United States. And it has a lot to do with our public education system.
I'm stuck in my thoughts. I guess I'll have to wait for the episode and learn in real time. Bobbi Fisher, thank you. It's been nothing short of a pleasure to do this first episode of what I honestly, truly feel will be something that we're going to be doing for a while. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Plain Civics. Join us for the journey as we break down the basics of how government works so you can make the government work for you.